Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where is the Line, where we explore the gray areas of life. My name is Jane Liu, and I am here with my co-host, Sabrina Fruhov. Sabrina, how are you today?
Hey Jane, I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, I'm getting ready to go to Germany and Europe tomorrow.
Yay.
So yeah, I'm busy packing right now, but very excited for this trip. How about you?
I'm good. It is Friday, the day that we're recording. So thank God it's Friday. It's been quite a long week. So I'm just very grateful to have survived to today. But even though I'm a little bit tired, I am very, very excited for our special guest today. Do you want to introduce her?
Yes, with absolute pleasure. So this might be my favorite conversation yet, if I can be a little biased here, but so excited to have Shaliza Kassam on here as our guest. Shaliza, I call her a dear friend of mine. We used to be coworkers in my first job in the US. And then another job, I followed her to another company. And 10 years later, we're still friends and someone that I deeply admire and just helped me through my toughest times, celebrating my best times. And yeah, so happy to have her on today. Shaliza, welcome to Where's the Line?
Thank you. Thank you both for having me. What an intro. I will try to live up to that amazing sort of list of qualifications. But no, really excited to be here and really excited to talk about what we're going to get into today, which is career enmeshment.
Yes. And before we dive in, let's share with our audience a little bit more about yourself, Shaliza.
Yes, thank you. So for those of you listening, hello, my name is Shaliza. I currently work in the tech industry. Talk about career enmeshment, of course. The first thing I say is, hi, my name is Shaliza and I work in the tech industry. Outside of my job, I bought a house last year. And I also adopted a dog during the pandemic. Her name is Ellie, and she's actually the reason or part of the reason why we gave up city life to move out to the burbs. And yeah, so in my so yeah, that's a little bit about me. Like I said, currently work in tech. Outside of my job, really enjoy writing. I'm writing a book right now, as well as a book of poems.
Amazing. Thank you for being here today. We're really excited. So the topic, as you already mentioned, is career enmeshment. So this is very top of mind for a lot of us. I was reading into like career identity and all that, and one of the term that came up is career enmeshment, which essentially is just this fancy word that describes the conflation of one's personal identity with that person's work. We learned that this is a phenomenon that generally happens for overachievers or people who may work in really demanding careers, where they really struggle to find the boundary between work life and home life, and it really floats into their identity, where if they're hating their job, they end up hating their life because that is such a big component of their life. This is also very top of mind because right around us here, especially in tech, we're seeing a lot of folks being laid off. Many of them may be experiencing this for the first time, and it's a really difficult experience to go through. So we're talking through this, and this just applies to so many people in different stages of their career. But Shaliza, I want to pose this question to you to start. What has been your experience with career enmeshment?
Thanks so much, Jane. Yeah, and what a great way to phrase it. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's when you don't have an identity or you struggle to find an identity outside of your career. And so I have always been super motivated by work. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, I didn't really care about my grades. I just wanted to work because I knew that if I worked, I could get something out of that, obviously money. I was super pumped about that. So I started my first job when I was really young, 15 years old. I applied for a special permit to be able to work a year earlier than you're supposed to. And I was a receptionist at a nursing home. And I would not say at that point I was enmeshed by my career in any way. I just was super excited to have a job and make some money so I could go to the Cheesecake Factory with my friends, which is what you did in high school. So I would say, but the mentality was always there of oh, working is like the goal, like your career, like expanding your career is your goal. So I went to college and I did a ton of internships. I think I did like 7 internships over the course of those 4 years, and was super proud of that. And like, I loved when, I loved when I got to tell people all the cool places I was working and how impressed they seemed by that. And something was like clicked, like I was like, oh, if I do really well in my career, people like me. Like I get this like validation, like, you know what I mean? And so I just ran with that. I mean, my 20s, all I wanted to do, it was like, I was chasing paychecks, I was chasing promos, I was chasing like everything that came with a corporate career. Cause it was, I was one of the first in my family to get a corporate career. It was like very validating. I was getting a lot of validation from everywhere with that. So I was excited. I was pumped. I was in my 20s. I was like, look at me, I'm so successful. Or at least I thought I was, on paper. And that kind of continued all through my 20s. And then I remember, if you can believe it, 2 years before I was laid off, I got promoted in my job to a role that I had been like really seeking. I was super excited about. And for 2 years, I would sit with my therapist and I was like, I don't get it. Like, I'm so unhappy, but I'm supposed to be so happy. Like, this is it. This is what I wanted to do. I'm doing it faster than I thought I would. And I'm so miserable. And that's when she started introducing this idea to me of what is your identity? We really started doing some hardcore identity work in therapy of like trying to figure out like, who am I outside of my career? I really couldn't answer that question. I had no idea what to say. And I felt silly about that. Like I couldn't believe that I used to think this idea, like when I was in my 20s and people would be like, I'm going to go to India and find myself, or I'm going to go do whatever. I used to think it was such a waste. I used to think it was such a waste of time. I was like, what do you mean find yourself? Like, you are who you are. I was such a capitalist. I was like, you are who you are, get a job. Like I was bought in. I was cracked up on capitalism. I loved it. Couldn't get enough. And so fast forward, I was in 2020, pandemic hit. I had an idea that layoffs were going to come, but I didn't think they were going to come so fast. And I didn't think they were going to be as big as at my company as they were. They tell us, I think in July, or maybe it was, I can't remember if it was June or July, somewhere around that. They were like, hey, just FYI, your department is getting reduced. You're all getting laid off. Your last day is going to be in August. And I was like, cool. I just adopted this puppy. I am now getting laid off from my job. And I just got diagnosed with an eating disorder. And I don't have an identity outside of my career. So this is going to be fun.
Oh my God.
But what it really was after I got laid off, it was 6 months of crying. But that was when the work started. That was when I recognized like I needed to, and sorry, one quick thing actually, before the healing started, I decided, okay, I'm going to start my own company. That's fine. I got laid off. No problem. I'm going to start my own company. I have no idea how to code an app. I'm going to code an app. Like, don't even worry about it. I'm good. And I was doing that and I was so miserable. I was so depressed. And I was talking to my therapist and I'm like, why isn't this working? And I bet she wanted to like hit me upside the head and be like, because you're not healing. You're not going in the right direction. Like you're just rinsing and repeating the formula that you've been given. And so I stopped and I worked with my therapist to try and find who I was outside of my career. And thankfully after a very, very long time and a lot of really hard work, I can say I've like come out the other side. And in a full circle moment, I'm actually back at the company that laid me off. For many reasons. It is a wonderful company, and I absolutely do love working there. But yeah, it was one of the best gifts I've ever gotten, even though it didn't seem like a gift at the time.
That's crazy. You've gone on a journey. I mean, Sabrina, I would love to hear from you as well. I just have to say, your story resonated so well with me, because I feel like that was the journey that I also went through.
Yeah.
And I can share a little bit more about my experience, but Sabrina, I would love to hear yours too. I very much in the same kind of growing up, it was the most important thing is to work, have a stable job, have an income, and build your family. Like it's this step-by-step type of thing that you follow. And I also started working very early. I remember having summer jobs, having even like during the year jobs. I don't even know for what. And I think like Shaliza, we kind of talked about this, like we come from families that were not, super rich. And so it was very important for the kids to start working early and have that flexibility, or even just have money for ourselves to, live a little. And so I remember starting work very early. Fast forward, getting into college, worked every single summer. I remember one summer I had 3 jobs. I had an internship and 2 like regular jobs, just to pay for school, just to pay for like living expenses. And I feel like at such an early age, my identity was this working, and I was proud. To your point, like I was very proud that I had all these internships. And I remember telling people were shocked that I didn't go enjoy my summer. And I was, so over the moon that I did this thing and I built my resume and it was all for this purpose. And I got out of college, started working at a pretty big company with a big name. And I remember that was so important for me. And part of it is like tactical, right? Like you want a big name on your resume, great. But part of it is this like identity is like, I work for this huge company that everybody knows this name if I say it to someone. And part of it, I think, was my problem. But I also think part of it is like the people around me validated that. Like I remember my parents would tell their friends or tell our extended family, oh, Jane worked at blah, or that is the company that she, left college for. And I remember seeing them light up, seeing the reaction of like, oh, wow, that's, these comments. And it like gave me this fulfillment of, wow, I made it, or I did the right thing. And I feel like that wrecked me. I don't know why we let that be such a big deal to define ourselves based on like the company name, the brand, the I don't know, just all of that really like enveloped me. And then fast forward, I worked for a couple different companies, and I remember a couple really big, like major points in my career where I sometimes look back and I'm still maybe frustrated about it. But one was because I moved company to company quite a bit, I was working in consulting, but I worked for a couple of different firms. I remember I was applying for a company, and the comment they gave me was, we don't know if you have a particular skill because you've moved from company to company. And that would like by jumping companies, we don't know if you actually had time to develop a particular skill. And I think that's probably fair to some degree, but I was so like devastated that this name of this company didn't get me to a place, and I wasn't able to prove myself and my worth and my skills and all of that. And that was really devastating. The other component, I also went through a layoff at the company before my current job, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I was already having issues, and Shaliza, exactly to your point, it was a blessing in disguise. I should have gotten out honestly before I was laid off, but I was laid off, and we'll talk about this later, but I was never prepared to be laid off. Like nobody warns you about layoffs after coming out of college. Like it was all about, how do you get a job? How do you interview? How do you qualify? All that. Nobody ever tells me how to prepare myself to lose a job. And so I was super depressed. And at the time I wasn't in therapy, so I was really struggling. I also, funny enough, tried to start my own company, thinking that that would heal my frustration or my pain didn't work out, and just like was in the worst place of my life. Also, how sad it is that a job threw me into the worst place of my life. Anyways, yeah, and then I ended up like things all worked out. I ended up getting the job that I'm currently in now, and it worked out, but those are some of the like really big moments where the job impacted how I felt about myself. And I definitely, honestly, even now struggle with career enmeshment. I know for a fact that I struggle with it. I identify a lot of times my personal skills, my values to my job. I'm working towards not being in that way, or in that situation. But yeah, that's so when Shaliza, you shared your story, oh my gosh, I could not have identified more because I feel like it was the exact same story and we just had very similar experiences. But anyways, Sabrina, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you both for sharing so openly and vulnerably. Very inspiring, and all the hardship that you guys went through, but made you to the person that you are right now. And today, I can relate to some of the concepts. But from a background perspective, I was lucky enough that my parents they were working really hard and they gave us a really nice childhood and a really nice youth. And I was fortunate enough to not having to work. But what they always said, you focus on your education in order to really focus on your career. So that was always their little bait. And I went with that. I needed to always have the best grades, hustle, get into the best schools, speak the most languages, and then get my MBA. And so it just went from one to another, always with this goal of you have to make it like really far one day. And so, but I never really asked myself, do I really want that, right? So some of the things that you both said, which I think it's so wild, and we all feel this, like Shaliza, you said, I'm noticed that people like me when I talked about these internships, right? Or Jane, you said, I noticed that my parents would light up when they talked about this company. And so to me, I vividly remember have moments of I was 10 years old when my mom would tell her friends what a great, like that I got an A in math, but just these like moments of just pivotal moments of your loved ones, right? And it's so crazy that we identify with those moments and therefore we hold on to that, right? Because we want more of that. We want other people to like us based on all those things. So yeah, long story short, I mean, after I got my MBA, then all of this pressure translated into my career. And I always wanted to be and needed to be the top performer, whether it was at this first job or then getting into this next bigger company, right? I always wanted to work for one of the big 4 tech companies, and that was my dream. And then I got in there and then I hustled I had no idea about what I was doing in this role as an analyst. To be honest, I'm not really an analyst, but hey, I figured it out. Shaliza and I figured it out, and but yeah, to me, I always strove for the best feedback, the promotion, and just climbing that ladder until really 2020 hit, and I went on this. I know people that have listened to this podcast before have heard me preach about my self-discovery, but really separating yourself from your career and what it means to be having a successful, fulfilled life. Career is one piece of the pie, right? It's not everything. And it's still, though, sometimes a battle that I have, mostly with my mom, where I still don't think she's really proud of me because she wanted a separate path from me. But that's okay, right? So we're all dealing with that. But anyway,
I think like everything you guys shared about that feeling, that is what you lose when you lose a job, because we look to work to give us our attaboys or like good job, right? Like when you do well at work, there is something that stays with you in terms of like worth and value throughout the rest of your day. And it happens really subtly, but like that is this phenomenon of like, we just hold it too close. We like hold that validation too close and too deep. And it's because we are not either getting it or giving it to ourselves outside of our career. We're not like actively seeking it outside of our career because we just assume that the career does that for us. Like, we're like, no, we're good. Then when you're in a position where it's like no longer there and you're sort of forced to like, okay, like, what if I am not my career? And what if I am not a sister or a daughter or a mother or father or whatever? What if I am none of these things? Then what am I? And can I reconcile that I deserve peace, happiness, joy, even if I don't produce?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the hardest thing for people to get over, or people to buy into this idea that if your purpose in life is to seek joy and just be happy, that's enough. And that is enough for you to be good, valuable, worthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to believe, like it's hard thing to internalize and practice.
It is. I mean, ultimately, we spend so many hours of our day working, right? Like that's the reality. And I think goes back to your point, it's hard to separate because that is such a huge chunk of our life. And so Sabrina pulled up this data point. It has been estimated that an average person will spend a third of their life at work. Like if I'm just thinking about my day, a good chunk of it is sleep. But then the next biggest chunk is work. As sad as it is, but that's the reality.
100%. Yes.
And like I was reading about how a lot of people, even people's last names and just the history of people's last names are about their work. So a lot of people's family names are like Smith it came from like a blacksmith kind of like history or family jobs. And there's all these names that are associated with the job of the family. And like, no wonder we associate so much, like our names are related to our jobs. And so it's just kind of insane. But Shaliza, I want to hear from you. How does one even identify that they are falling into this trap? Because it is such a big part of our life. So it's kind of natural that we could fall into this situation.
100%. And here's the thing, even when you're working towards not being career enmeshed, there's a part of you that will be career enmeshed, because to your point, it's a third of our life. There's no way that we could just be like, okay, I don't care about work anymore. Like you have to care about work because it's a lot of our like time and energy is spent on there. So I think there's a few things. One, like if you're feeling like you want to go on this journey, if you're feeling like maybe it's time for me to sort of, maybe I do put too much into my career. If you ask yourself like, who am I? Or even a better question is like, can you list 3 things that you've done to bring yourself peace, joy, or happiness in the past 3 months? If you can name 3 things that you've done for yourself intentionally to bring yourself peace, joy, happiness in the last 3 months, you might be okay. I mean, I don't know, talk to your therapist. Maybe. But in my experience, very rarely do people who are enmeshed with their careers take time to intentionally set out to find those things for themselves. They would do it for someone else in a heartbeat, I'm sure, because generally people who are career enmeshed are also very good friends and very good family members and will really put themselves aside to bring joy, peace, happiness to others. But what have they done for themselves? So I think the first thing is identifying, okay, I want to go on this journey. There are a few things that need to be done, right? And again, I'm not a therapist. I'm just sharing my experience. This is sort of what I did. While I was at work and my therapist and I were working on identity stuff, she asked me like, what would it be like if you just cared a little less at work? Like, what would that look like if you just phoned it in a little? And at first I just like could not get past the idea of phoning it in. I was like, I just like can't. I was so self-involved. I was like, there's no way that I could phone it in and no one will notice. Like everyone cares about what I'm doing. And it's like, the truth is, no, that's just not true. Like if you are enmeshed with your career, you probably need to phone it in a little bit. Like you're probably doing way more than you're getting paid for. So like maybe tone it down a little. so that's the first thing, is like practice what you can give less effort to. And the way to do that is to identify the things that matter and identifying the things that don't. This is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do at work. Is someone gave me this advice when I was deep in a hole of feeling overwhelmed, feeling underappreciated. I was just really in a bad place. And someone said to me, if you can identify the percentage of things that really matter, which is really low, and you can identify what those things are, your life will get exponentially easier. And then it did. When I did that, I practice that now in my work today. And I cannot tell you how much it helps with career enmeshment. If something sounds like an emergency, unless you identify, everybody listening, I'm sure, has a great gauge of whether or not something is an emergency. If you really feel like it is, go for it. But if you're kind of like, I don't know if this is an emergency, just wait. Just wait. If it is, it'll come back. It will come back to your inbox. It will come back to your teams. It will come back to whatever messaging site your corporate job uses. Assuming that's corporate job. Especially in the tech world, like, we're not saving lives. We say it all the time, and then we act like we are. It's like, we're really not. If something's an emergency, it'll come back to you. And it is okay. That is okay. Like, no, if something's an emergency, they come back to you, they're not going to be like, wait, I texted you or I pinged you about this yesterday. Why didn't you answer? And if they do, it's going to take 2 seconds because the emergency is still happening. So you probably need to solve that problem. Like, we're not going to spend too much time talking about how a date went by. Okay. So that's that side of things. If you're in the job right now and you want to practice being less than, like, start practicing what you can start doing less of. On the personal side of things, and this is where the best stuff happens. It's like the most magical, the most like good stuff happens when you sit with yourself with these feelings. So like for me, when I was after I'd gotten laid off, I was lost. The way I described it to my therapist was like, it feels like I've jumped off a cliff into the abyss of darkness, and I'm just floating there. There's no up, there's no down, there's no walls. I can't see a thing. It's all dark, and I am lost. I am utterly lost. And my anxiety wanted me to pick something to hold on to. Just pick anything. Start your own company. At one point I was like, I'm going to buy a laundromat. Like there's so many things. I was like, I'm going to become a stand-up comic. Like, it's just all over the place. And my therapist was like, what would happen if you just sat in this? Like, it's really uncomfortable and it sucks. And you wake up in the morning and you have no plan. But what would happen if you woke up some mornings and had no plan and didn't produce? And that is when things really started to unfold for me. I spent a lot of time. I should say I was also going through eating disorder recovery at this time. So that took up a lot of time as well. I was in an intensive outpatient program, which meant that I was doing 3 hours of 3 hours of group 3 to 4 times a week. So that did take up quite a chunk of time. But when I wasn't doing that, I was waking up with the sole intention of finding peace, joy, or happiness that day. That was it. How do I find peace, joy, or happiness? And it helped me find things that I really enjoyed, find things that I really didn't enjoy. I made a list, I called it a yes list, of all the things I wanted to do that I've never given myself the time to do, or I always thought like, oh, I'm working, I'm far too busy to do that. I can't go do that. I can't go to a Renaissance fair. What am I going to do with Renaissance fair? And then I went to Renaissance fair and it was so fun. It was so cool. And so it's like, it's really investing. The way that you invest in your career, take that and start investing in yourself. Start finding out the way you would research for your career. Start researching yourself that way. Start figuring out who you are. Start figuring out what you like. And you might also, in doing so, find so many parts of you that need your attention and your love. I did so much inner child healing during that time. I did not even know I had a part of me that was so sad, so broken, and needed so much love and attention. And I'm so glad that I was able to give it to her. So I think once you start once you start detaching your identity from your career, there is this whole other like bold and beautiful life of you on the other side. And I'm like, it's funny, like if 22-year-old me was listening to me today, she'd be like, what the F? You are a totally different person. And I am. Like I said, I loved capitalism. I thought it was the best thing on the planet because it gave me validation. It gave me money. It made me important. It made me feel good. And then on the other side, I was like, wow. And now I'm like, that was all, it just doesn't even feel real. Like that was all like, it was so disconnected from this part of me that I didn't even know existed.
Right. You were a different person.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm buzzing over here because obviously, Shaliza, I've known you now for a long time and like seeing you in this journey, and it just warms my heart. And it's so beautiful. And how many parallels you draw between like separating yourself from your career, your identity, but also drawing the parallel to like finding joy in life in general, right? And there's so much goodness. You just gave our listeners a whole crash course on how to find joy and happiness. So thank you. And when we went on this work retreat, one thing that was so beautiful also was that, so many times as we talk about work, we're always talking about work, right? What do you do when you meet someone new? What do you do for work, right? I vividly remember when I was in San Francisco for work and you go out to a bar, that's the first question they ask you, what do you do? But also, what tech company do you work for? Or what company did you found? It's always about these things. But when I went on this work retreat with you, I really appreciated you starting to build these relationships and asking people, what do they do for joy? So I found that so beautiful. And people were kind of taken off guard at first, but they really latched onto that, like, oh, that's such an interesting question. Thank you for asking. So what other things do you think, how can we like reposition that to truly get to know each other beyond work using some of these questions?
I love that you gave the San Francisco example too, of like going to a bar and people asking you that, because what you do and where you work, those are things like we've talked about, like those are status symbols. Like it's almost just like you saying like what kind of car you drive, or like, you know what I mean? Like you say it and then people associate something with that value. And we like it. We love it as human beings. We love to put people in a box and like organize them, you know, compartmentalize them in our mind and say like, okay, this person is that and this person is that. But like what we do by doing that, we like rob ourselves of meeting a whole person, right? Only meet this like very singular part of them that, and by the way, that question sets the tone for the rest of your conversation too. So if you're asking like, what do you do for work? You're really going in a direction of like having a conversation about accomplishments or having a conversation about worth and value in almost a dysfunctional way. Whereas if you ask people like, what do you do for joy? Or what was the last thing that made you laugh? These things allow us to get to the human inside, the person, that like spark that you want from that person. It allows us to really get to know them in a short period of time. So like, if I go and ask someone like, oh, what is something that, you know, what is something that you do for joy? And they tell me, oh my God, I really love brewing my own beer. And I do that on the side. Like, would that have come up had you asked about their work first, or had you guys been talking about the changing industry trends of the climate and like, no, probably not, right? And so it's like it's a really exciting way to talk to people in a, you know, by setting up a context that gets down to who they are, and that's what you want to know, right? Like I could care less what you do for work, like. And I don't mean that in a callous way, right? Like I know that, again, I know work is a third of our lives and it is an important part of what we do. But my goal in life is to remember that it should be such a small part, even though from a time perspective, it takes up a lot of my time. I don't want it to take up a lot of my heart and soul. I want my heart and soul to be filled with beautiful and joyous things that like make me happy, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think from a conversation, I love talking to people about like what brings them joy. What was the last thing that made them laugh? If like, what is one thing that puts a smile on their face every day? Like if you asked me that, it would be my dog Ellie. Like she puts a smile on my face every single day. And I absolutely love talking about her. So I would love it if someone came up to me like, tell me about your dog Ellie. I'd be like, great, strap in. We're going to be here for 8 hours.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, because as we're talking, I'm like making this realization that like, because we have such limited time to do what we're actually passionate about, because it's outside of work, because we have limited hours, that is actually what is more important for you, because you're choosing to like allocate your spare time for this, like brewing beer, whatever it is, right? Like,
Whatever it is. Yeah.
and the fact that you are asking or opening up a conversation by asking what are they doing for their joy, you're asking like, how do you, when you have the choice to do something for fun, how do you allocate that time? Because
Yeah.
that probably is the most important or most valuable thing for
Yeah.
you. And so it reveals like a different side of that person altogether.
Totally. And I also find that it like challenges people in a way to like think about that. If you don't intentionally like think about setting up time for joy or setting aside time to find joy, peace, happiness, like then when you ask them that question, they're like, it kind of like click, like sometimes something could click in them and be like, maybe I should like think about setting aside some time to like find out what brings me joy. You know what I mean? Like it's exciting to talk about with people. Like that's, you know, and I think too, it leads with vulnerability. Like it really like it puts walls down in a way for people to connect. And that's really what, and then that's really what this is, you know, this at the end of the day, bringing it back to career enmeshment. Like, why does career enmeshment start? Like, because we're looking for connection, validation, love, value, and like we're getting it from our careers. And so what's the practice? We have to identify it and practice getting it from somewhere else and practice giving it to ourselves. Like if you need that, right? If you're like, I did a good job today, practice telling yourself you did a good job today, even when you didn't do anything, right? Like I'll like do my skincare and be like, fist bump myself, like, oh my God, that was so great. Like, good job doing your skincare, girl. And that's important, you know?
And I think actually by you asking those questions, you took sort of the pressure off of them too. And I think they welcome that. Like, oh, we can start like that too. I honestly think you were doing them a favor. And I guarantee you they took that question and might have asked other people.
I hope, yes.
And that's so
that
cool.
is the goal. Yes. I hope, I do hope that we can like get to a point where when we meet people and like we ask them way more important questions than what do you do? You know?
You know what's funny though? Like I feel like everybody has an elevator pitch for their job.
Yes.
I as you are talking about this question, I do not have a good answer. Like I'm like, yes, I do have hobbies and I have things that I enjoy doing, but I don't have a cohesive practiced answer for something like that. But that shows how much we value like having a very good answer about our job, having an elevator pitch. I can describe my job in 30 seconds, whatever, you know, we all practice that. But nobody ever practiced like, this is my hobby. This brings me joy. This is what I do with my spare. I don't have a good answer. That's like very
I'm disappointed right now. We should talk about our podcast.
I have to, well, now because you know, right, like it makes you really think what is important, where you're spending your time. So it just, it helps people prioritize. So I love that. Thank you. I want to go back to the topic of layoffs, because obviously that is very top of mind. And we talked about how we're always we're taught and we're prepared to go apply for a job, but never to lose a job. I know you and I kind of shared that losing a job really kind of threw us off the deep end. Like it really got us into a bad place. What can you share with people who may be going through it now, or people who have never experienced it and can't fathom that happening to them? It could happen at any point. What would you recommend to people who may be going through that right now?
Yeah, getting laid off is so tough. Like enmeshed or not, expected or not, like even if you know it's coming and you're not career enmeshed, there is a grief in being laid off, right? It is a loss. And so there is something there to mourn. And I think that the first thing was super important for me was allowing myself the time and space and permission to grieve the loss of it, even if it was something that wasn't making me happy. This is the job that I was talking about with my therapist, where I was like, I'm here. I thought I made it. I thought I was supposed to love this, right? So even after I lost that job, I had to grieve it. I had to mourn the loss of it, and giving myself permission to be sad about something that I didn't really like anyway was a little bit of confusing to like reconcile in my mind. But that was like the first piece. I think like there is no timeline for it. Like, allow yourself to grieve the loss of your job. Like, it is a significant event that's happened. Even if that layoff had nothing, which largely layoffs have nothing to do with your value in the workplace or your performance. Just allow there is still, when you get laid off, you might still have, like I did, the inner critic going and saying like, you're just not important enough for the company to keep, or whatever that might be. So allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to mourn, and try to sort of like remind yourself daily, like, okay, this is not a depiction of my value or my worth. And I'm going to be able to get back on the other side of this. I think like exactly what you said, like there's no handbook for getting laid off and how you deal with it. I think at the time when I was laid off, I was in such a privileged position where I was getting a severance. It was the pandemic. And so I was able to apply for unemployment, and I had savings. And so with that, I was really able to take time off and commit to inner work. I did that for a year and a half, which I don't think is accessible or realistic for many people. If it is, if you're listening to this and you just got laid off and you have the resources to take time off, true time off, give yourself that gift. You will not regret it. And once you give yourself that gift, invest in a therapist, a good therapist. That is the best thing you can do for yourself. And even if you don't have the resources to take a significant amount of time off, now that you have hopefully a little bit of time while you're looking for a new job, I would recommend setting aside time. This is what I did. I would set aside time for myself throughout the day, where I would like kick off the depression, or try to shake off the depression, turn off my TV. I would sit down and I would start to think about, like, who am I outside of my job? Who am I outside of my job? And I would just list things. And sometimes I would list things about who I am outside my job. Sometimes I would Google journal prompts, like self-worth journal prompts. And then I would journal for like 10 minutes, right? Or 15 minutes, or however long you can muster at that time. I started meditating. I started taking myself on dates, monthly dates, where I would organize a date for myself. I would purchase a ticket to somewhere, like there had to be some kind of investment in it. The other thing that really helped me, and this is going to sound so like, I hate to say granola, but like kind of granola, but like communing with nature was something that like really helped me with the mourning process, and just like getting back to me and tapping into a side of myself, that a much softer, slower side of myself that I like didn't create space for. Getting laid off is so tough, but it does give you the small luxury of time, whatever that time is, whether it's a short amount of time for you or a long amount of time for you. Allow yourself to grieve, but also allow yourself to use that time for some sort of investment in you. And I'm not talking about like, go take a LinkedIn learning course, or go take a or Coursera course or whatever. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like really connecting with soul, spiritual, heart, like connecting with that you inside of you, finding out what makes her or him happy, and reminding yourself that your job, you are not your job, and your loss of your job does not define your worth as a person or as a human being.
Mm-hmm. I feel like one thing you have mentioned earlier is this concept of like almost like not having an answer and being in the uncomfortable, being in limbo, essentially, not having a job, losing that identity, not knowing what's next. Like that is so uncomfortable, but you almost have to slow down, be in that situation rather than trying to look for a solution, trying to do something just to take an action. I think a lot of people are guilty of that. I know I did that to try to find comfort.
Of course, it's a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism for people who are, I don't know if you identify as anxious. I am an anxious person, highly anxious tendencies. I'm on meds for it. I'm very open about my like mental health journey. In fact, like anxiety medication was a huge turning point for my eating disorder for me. Like that was, that allowed me to approach food in a way that wasn't fearful, at least. Anyway, but highly anxious people, when they feel out of control, they seek discipline. And so like generally we'll make lists and we'll like plan out our whole day, like minute by minute, and we'll make like hypothesis trees for like all the different things that could happen and like, you know, every scenario. And the way to start this, you're not going to go from 0 to 100. Like, it's not like all of a sudden you're going to be like, okay, I'm not going to care about this today and just go about your. But something that my therapist and I worked on was, okay, when I'm having these really anxious fits, when I'm sitting in the discomfort and I notice that I'm sitting in it and I want to, I want to cope with that by making a list or planning or whatever. Set a timer for yourself for what seems like a reasonable amount of time to sit in that discomfort. For me, I think it was like 5 minutes it started with. For other people, it could be like 20 minutes. Like my tolerance, or you might be someone that's like, I'll give you 30 seconds. Like it's everyone's anxiety, everyone's like threshold is different, right? Window of tolerance is different. So, but I started with 5 minutes and I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit here for 5 minutes. I'm not going to do anything. Like, I'm not going to distract myself. I'm not going to numb this feeling by like going on TikTok or going on the TV or going on Instagram. Like, I'm not going to numb, but I'm also not going to do. I'm just going to sit in feeling like everything is out of control for 5 minutes. After I did that for 5 minutes, I could go and obsessively clean my kitchen. I could go and like vacuum all my baseboards, but I could not do that until I sat in it for 5 minutes. And as you grow that tolerance, by the way, this timer trick works for everything. If you're like, I really want to text my ex, set a timer for 5 minutes. If after 5 minutes you still want to text your ex, you can, but first set a timer for 5 minutes. It works for everything. So like, that is how you practice sitting in the discomfort, is just by sitting in it. And if you can't, if you're like, okay, I can sit in it, but if you want to like go longer, let's say, okay, I'm going to go on a trail. Do this safely because it is not safe for women out there today, but so do this safely. But say you're I'm going to go on a trail. I'm going to put my phone on do not disturb. I'm going to walk the trail for 30 minutes and then I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to walk on this trail for 30 minutes. And then afterwards I can do whatever I want. Right. But it's like setting up these like very small goals for yourself of whatever you're struggling with, like, sitting in the discomfort of whatever it is, because life, what I have learned is like, life is mostly sitting in that. Like the better that we can be in both situations that are like really, really good or really, really bad, the more that we can like calm our nervous system and allow ourselves to sit in that, the more clearly we can approach life in a way that aligns with our values and who we are. Right. And it allows us to not be so reactionary.
Yeah.
So that is that's how I did it. I just started with the real small steps of sitting in the discomfort.
Yeah, that is though the hardest work of life, right? And I think like so many people may not know where to start, but you just gave our audience so many great tangible tips. So thank you.
I hope, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no, and especially because we had a question around sort of obviously, and I appreciate you acknowledging your privilege, and the three of us are very privileged as well, and can take some time off. And then there may be, or according to lendingclub.com, there are 60% of the US that live paycheck to paycheck. But I think, and obviously that's something to acknowledge, and not everyone may have the time or like the resources, I guess, or the privilege to be laid off for a long time. But what you are saying, I think the principle holds true here, right? Where you can take 5 minutes of your day to slow down and sit in that discomfort and really focus on what would you want, and not fall into this like doing trap. Because I mean, humans are wired in a sense that we always look for instant gratification, right? What can I do to get that fix to make me feel better? But really the true growth and to make us truly happy, wherever that is, comes from just sitting there. So it's so cool, Shiza, how you describe that, but you actually like, you've done this and you're practicing it every day, and it is a journey, right? Like we just heard, it was a long journey for you. And so for listeners, don't be discouraged, I guess. Like you just have to start, but it's like with meditation, start with 5 minutes and you might hate it at first.
A minute, like
a minute. It's start with 1 minute.
Like any amount of time that you can take out of your day to intentionally dedicate to yourself is time well spent. You are the person that you spend all your life with. You are the person that you spend the most amount of time with. So the way that the relationship with yourself is so critically important. And if that relationship with yourself is sort of like, kind of like this, like primarily this inner critic that bullies you to like do better at work, and like you like, okay, we have to do this, we have to be productive, we have to be the best performer, we have to be this, like this is really important to us. Just repurpose that person. Like that voice is so useful, but that voice does not know how to motivate you, because she or he or they are motivating you in the same way that parents of our generation motivated us, right? Not compassionate. It's not gentle. It wasn't gentle parenting. Although I'm a huge advocate. Like I love the way that we're evolving in towards that. But it's just repurposing that voice. That is how career enmeshment happens too. Is just through this idea that like, you know, you have to be really good at something. Career is not easy. Sorry, that's not easy to be good at. But career is something that we do so much that we have the time to get good at it, right? And so it's like something that's like, you're like, okay, I'm spending a third of my life here. I'm going to focus on it. I'm going to do this really, really well. And then before you know it, it's the only thing giving you validation. It's the only thing making you feel worthy. And you haven't given that to yourself in any other way.
Right.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Shaliza. This has been an absolute pleasure. I don't know about you, Jane, but I've been taking notes. We'll be sharing all of those amazing tips with our audience in a summary. So again, thank you for spending time with us. But before we go, please let our audience know what you're working on right now, anything that where they can find you, and what else you want to share.
Okay, where you can find me. You can find me on Instagram at Shaliza K. And I'm working on a couple things that I'm super excited about right now. One is a book called The Therapist. It is a thriller about a woman who gets accused of killing her therapist. And I'm realizing maybe I should talk to my therapist about about like if there's something there. No, I'm joking. But and then another thing I'm working on is a poem book. It's called A Poem For, and it's a series of poems for people in my life. And every title, every poem in the book starts with a poem for and followed by who it's for. So so far we've got a poem for my sister, a poem for the drunk girl I met in the bathroom, and a poem for the one that got away.
Oh, I can't wait to read those.
Yeah. So, so hopefully, you know, I have no idea when any of these books will see the light of day, but that's what I'm working on.
Very exciting. All right, well, that's a wrap for today. Thank you to our listeners, as always, for your support. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. If you want to email us and share more, maybe perhaps about what is your experience with career and identity, or if you have other ideas for our podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please email us at where'sthelinepod@gmail.com. And the more you can support us, the better, by subscribing to wherever you listen to us, on Apple, Spotify, and Google Podcast. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.